Another thing that's wrong with nihilism is that it doesn't complete the deconstruction of the ego into awakening and God realization. So the problem is, again, the same way that skepticism is often misused. I've talked about this in my episode called False versus True Skepticism. Oftentimes, the way skepticism and nihilism is used is that it's used to destroy all of the stuff outside of you, and it's not turned in towards you. Really, what you should be doing, you take the wrecking ball of nihilism and skepticism and swing it at yourself. Swing it at that giant ego of yours. Deconstruct that. Before you go deconstructing social systems and governments and even science, deconstruct your own ego. But see, the nihilist doesn't do that. Almost every nihilist that I could run into, I guarantee you they're going to have a giant ego. They're going to have a nihilistic ego. In fact, nihilism itself will become the ego and the identity. But they're not going to be conscious of that. So in fact, they're contradicting themselves. Because see, when the nihilism gets so deep, the nihilism has to destroy itself too. But most nihilists aren't willing to do that because that's too threatening for the ego to do. So what the ego does is the ego co-opts nihilism as part of its survival strategy. And then what I would say is that the survival strategy of nihilism, if you're going to use it for that, is very dysfunctional. And in this sense, normies are correct. Jordan Peterson is correct. Nihilism as a survival strategy in life ain't so good. It's not going to work out for you. But there is a deeper, truer nihilism which leads to awakening if you take it that far. That means deconstructing your ego. So another thing that nihilism gets wrong is that mostly what nihilism is as a philosophy is it's just stuck at the level of belief and concept. It's not actualized. It's also turned into a political ideology sometimes, like maybe anarchism. That's also an invalid use of nihilism. Nihilism doesn't make any political prescriptions, truly. If you think government is bad and evil, you're not being a proper nihilist. And finally, what nihilism gets wrong is that it overlooks what happens when you reach the bottom of nihilism. If you go all the way down the rabbit hole of nihilism, eventually what happens is that you awaken. Everything loses meaning, but then after that, you go through the dark night of the soul, and then the ego dies, and then you awaken to God. Not as a belief, not as some Christian fairy tale. God as consciousness. Consciousness as the only real thing. So what nihilism overlooks is that, yes, the Christian versions of God were stupid, and so are many of the other religious versions of God. Yes, religion is pretty stupid. It's filled with dogma and bullshit and so forth, and the meaning it comes up with is a false pseudo-meaning, but it's missing the very soul and heart of reality, which is that you're God, that God is everything, that God is beauty, God is love, God is divinity, spirit, goodness, truth, consciousness, all as absolutes. So the paradox of meaninglessness is that when it completely collapses, you actually discover infinite love and absolute goodness, which is everything. And then you realize, oh, all these stupid nihilistic beliefs and philosophies I had, all these philosophers I read, the existentialists, Nietzsche and all this, they were all deluded, and I was just using them as a defense mechanism against the realization of what I am as God, infinite love. And then you're no longer depressed. You no longer want to destroy at that point. At that point, you so fall in love with yourself and with reality that you actually rediscover a higher purpose. And the higher purpose is to help mankind to awaken. Not because you have to, not because someone told you, not because religion tells you, not because it's a moral tradition or a norm, but simply because that's what God would do. That's what consciousness does. Consciousness is a self-awakening system. Everything that happens within consciousness is just a means to help consciousness awaken to itself in the absolute sense, in the biggest picture sense. And then you just, when you relinquish your selfish needs and concerns, you lose yourself. And then when you lose yourself, you just become a force of the universe for its own awakening in whatever means that might be. It might be art, it might be teaching, it might be engineering, it might be science, it might be politics, whatever. There's a million ways that you could do that. And then your life takes on the highest and deepest meaning. But this meaning, it's not a constructed meaning, really. It's you realize that all meaning is a construction, but awakening is not a construction. The universe awakening to itself, that's not a construction. That's an absolute. And so what the nihilist is overlooking is the existence of the absolute. And that's a problem a lot of people have. When I start talking about absolute truth, many scientific and atheistic and rational people, they scratch their heads and they just can't open their minds to the possibility of the existence of an absolute truth. But consider that you're wrong and that absolute truth does actually exist. Not as a concept or a belief, but absolutely. This is it. You're in absolute truth right now. You just don't realize it. So criticisms of nihilism, as with many things, like I said before, that distinction of criticism from above or from below. A criticism of nihilism from below would be one coming from traditional values, and it's fear-based. It's from an ego, basically. So like a Christian, or maybe someone like Jordan Peterson might criticize nihilism on the grounds that it's going to lead to a bad life, a bad marriage, and an inability to function in the world. And that comes from a place of fear because it's like it's going to be total chaos. Relativity is going to lead to total chaos, and society will fall apart. This is a fear-based, shadow-based criticism from below of nihilism. This only comes because that ego mind that is making that criticism has not itself actually gone through the nihilistic process. And you can tell because it's avoidant and it's scared of that process. That's why it's doing the criticizing. The criticism is a defense mechanism. This is why traditionally oriented people are very fearful of nihilism. Like if you have Christian parents and you come home with a nihilist textbook, you're going to freak them out. But then there's criticisms of nihilism from above. So I criticize nihilism a bit in this episode from above. And the difference is that I've actually gone through the nihilism. I was a nihilist with a lowercase n, and then I became a nihilist with an uppercase n. And then what I realized is that nihilism itself is self-defeating, and it's conceptual, and that there's something deeper than nihilism, which is just infinite consciousness and love and God. It's the thing that people like Jordan Peterson think they're defending when they're defending traditional values against nihilism, but actually which is paradoxically the very thing which is keeping them from realizing God and love and from understanding religion. So if I was debating a nihilist, I could tell him all sorts of things he's got wrong about his worldview, but it would be coming from above because I went through what he's going through. I've been where he's been stuck. And I can see how his nihilism is just another piece of clothing that the ego has adorned. It's a defense mechanism from deconstructing the ego.